Welcome, everyone. My name is Nina Benoit. I'm the Director of Systemity at Brightest and host of the AI Systemity podcast. So for first-time listeners, this podcast talks about all things related to artificial intelligence or AI and sustainability, exploring how AI can have a positive impact on our planet and our people, but also what are the potential limitations and risks we need to be aware of. Today, I have the pleasure of welcoming Mike Spaeth. Mike is the Global Vice President at the United States Artificial Intelligence Institute and a leading voice at the intersection of AI, geospatial intelligence, and sustainability. So, with decades of experience across Earth observation, quantum computing partnerships, and public-private AI strategy, Mike's brings a unique perspective on how satellite data can power climate solutions. So, Mike, thank you so much for joining us today. It's a real pleasure to have you on the podcast. And I know that you have been a fan of the podcast as well and listening to a lot of episodes. So I really appreciate your support.
No, Nina, thank you. As you did mention, I'm a huge fan of the podcast. Some of my favorites were Ann Lerner Nesbitt and Susan Karps. So, being able to participate in this podcast is an honor. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining and bringing your expertise today. So you've had a very impressive journey across AI, sustainability, and the space industry. So could you briefly walk us through your background and what led you to do the work that you do today?
Yeah, thanks, Nina. So my journey has always sat at the crossroads of technology, sustainability, and public policy. Most recently, I was in the Earth observation industry, really using satellites to monitor everything from deforestation to flooding. But my career started out of college, where I received a master's of public administration and went to Washington, D.C., where I worked for my local senator and even spent time working with President Bill Clinton and Vice President Al Gore.
Wow, impressive.
Yeah, that's where it all began.
Super cool. Thank you so much for sharing that and a little bit about where your journey started. That's definitely really exciting. And I didn't know that you also worked with the president. How cool is that? And so for listeners who are newer to this topic, how exactly do satellites and AI work together to drive sustainability insights?
Yeah, so at the core, satellites give a bird's eye view of the planet, but that's really just raw data. Is able to be done with AI is that it turns that fire hose of data, images and signals into actionable insights. Most recently, I worked at a satellite operator that was working to take satellite data and provide it to Google and Microsoft and IBM to enable them to train on this data to be able to create real world insights that can detect methane leaks, can also track illegal fishing, all done from space. So without AI, satellite data it's overwhelming. But with AI, it becomes a decision-making engine for governments, for businesses, and communities that really want to use this satellite data and apply it to ESG sustainability ratings and rankings to really help us adapt to climate change.
That's really exciting that you're working with those companies to provide them with the data, and I think that's extremely relevant. The examples that you mentioned with methane, for example, I think that's a fantastic example. And so to understand that a bit better, what would you say are the most promising real-world applications of satellite-powered AI for tackling climate change today?
Yeah, so unfortunately, I think one of the first guests from the United States, and unfortunately what we're seeing here in the States is a lack of focus on ESG and sustainability. Not just a lack of focus, but almost, demonizing the term ESG. If you look back this time last year, ESG was, or even 2 years ago, was prominent in the financial service industry, within the oil and gas industry, which was focusing on methane monitoring. And for the past 8 months, that has not been the case. I worked on a large project to detect methane leaks, that were really invisible to the human eye, but hugely damaging, but could be captured from satellites. And this was a large, it was actually close to $800 million project. It was approved, but once there was administration change in the White House to a new president, the project was put on hold. Pieces of the project were dismantled, especially focusing on indigenous communities in the United States. So, what we're seeing here in the focus on methane monitoring is absolutely different than when I saw 3 to 4 years ago when I worked at Moody's ESG on the risk side.
And I think that's a very interesting point that you're raising about the United States, and that's something that I've been noticing, of course, with a lot of different people working for companies, and also saying the same thing as you are in terms of the shift in focus. And so would you say among the different examples that you already mentioned, so you mentioned methane, for instance, would you say there are other useful applications of AI when it comes to satellites? For instance, deforestation is a topic. What would you say is really promising at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, I've seen disaster response when satellite data and AI models can predict flood paths and
Mhm.
potential wildfire spread as another example. I think it all comes down to risk mitigation, and having a bird's eye view of the planet can definitely help determine risk and mitigate risk. And obviously, that needs to be tied to AI to be more efficient and being able to be deployed correctly.
That makes a lot of sense. Absolutely. I would be curious to hear more about previous projects that you've done, and you mentioned this methane leak project. So I'd be curious to hear why that's important and what you were doing exactly for that project.
Yeah, so unfortunately, it was important and was so important that there was a large amount of resources, time, and effort provided to it. And what the focus was is taking ground truth, which was basically methane detection via IoT device, then doing methane detection via drones, and then satellite data, and being able to take that data and be able to make decisions on where to mitigate, methane leaks.
And so another question I had to understand again different applications of how we can use satellite images for AI would be how can we use these images and these data to track deforestation, as this is quite a big topic right now. In Europe, for instance, you have the EUDR, the European Deforestation Regulation, and you do need this data to track the deforestation. So could you explain us a little bit more how this can be done?
Yeah, and so what really attracted me to Earth observation and satellite data was that you're able to get an accurate, clear picture of even places that were extremely remote. So when I was at Moody's on the ESG team, working specifically within the energy sector, one of the things we needed to do is get information from the oil and gas companies. Found there was a lack of transparency because they knew we'd never know, right? When you look at these oil basins, it's, vast, and there's no way you could tell really what was going on out there. And on the deforestation side, it's the same. You can't even fly a plane over some of these areas, but satellites can pick up that data for true transparency to say, ground truth, this was here, now it's not. There is a plane, landing strip in the middle of the Amazon or any area. And that, landing strip is used for a plane that will land and either do mining or deforestation. So that can all be picked up by satellite data. And that's what initially going from Moody's into the satellite operator industry became, made me so excited to be able to bring that transparency to areas like deforestation.
And I believe this is also a field that's evolving very quickly right now, specifically because of EUDR. That's at least where I see the most growth, because a lot of companies need to track this data, right? So they have to report on that. And so looking ahead, what advancements in geospatial AI are you excited about, and what impact do you think they could have for the future of the planet?
Yes, AI has really run out of data, right, for training LLMs. They've been trained on the entire internet. Now they're looking for additional data sources, and satellite data is a vast data source. For example, you can capture the entire Earth's landmass every day. And within that satellite data, there are embeddings to say, okay, soil moisture is here. This is the type of vegetation in satellite data. So if we can take that satellite data, provide it to a Google, Microsoft, OpenAI, they can then use that data to digest and enable countries to say, okay, as an example, where could there be a flood this year? Or individuals saying, this year is there a potential issue for flooding in my city? Being able to ask questions of the data that it would have taken hundreds of people and eyeballs to be able to look at the area and make that determination. Now, instead of people looking at the data, you can have AI pulling the areas that would even be unexpected, right? You can now say, oh, there's a chance for a wildfire in this area. We never thought it would be possible, only because the satellite data is picking up things like dry foliage, low soil moisture, as an example. So yeah, I mean, it's exciting if it's used in the right way.
Definitely, and I think it's a really good point that you're raising, that some countries might not even be aware of certain areas or regions that need support. And to give a specific example now, Spain just released this new mandatory reporting because they declared a state of climate emergency. So, a country like Spain could definitely use this kind of information to make sure that they're able to tackle wildfires better. So very interesting to think about all the different applications, especially when it comes to climate disasters, right?
That's a great point.
Fantastic. So that was my last question. Is there anything else that you would like to add, Mike?
No, just my hope that the United States goes back to a focus on the environment, to focus on mitigating climate change. I believe it will. The pendulum always swings in Washington, D.C., and having served, in D.C., in addition, I ran for office a couple of times at the state level, understanding how the mechanisms work in the government, there will be, we'll go back to the sanity of the way it used to be on the ESG and sustainability side. So, it's inevitable. I'm hoping and excited about it. And that, that there's tools out there enabling AI to be that driver, enabling AI with satellite data to be that driver of change. So, I'm pessimistic about what's happening today, but I'm excited about what's going to happen with in the future with AI and satellite data.
Yes, and I think that a lot of American listeners can relate with you with your sentiments, and I think that the AI narrative is something that can be very interesting, of course, to investors, to companies who maybe do not want to invest into ESG right now, but could be interesting in the efficiency, the risk mitigation of AI, and the potential benefits that it provides. So I think that can be a good narrative to push for right now, at least in the US.
Yeah, Nina, thanks for hosting this important conversation. And you hit on a great point. It's really about risk mitigation. And when you talk about ESG and sustainability and have it focus on risk mitigation, that's the winning conversation. Mitigating wildfire risk, tying it into corporation risk. If you can tie that into dollars and cents through risk mitigation, that's the type of conversation that can resonate with governments and corporations and countries.
Absolutely. Mike, thank you so much for this great conversation. It took a bit of an unexpected political turn, but I think that it is very relevant to this conversation, obviously, and it is also very important to mention it. So thank you so much for sharing your insights and your expertise. And to everyone listening, if you found this episode valuable, please share it with someone you think might love it too. And you can also connect with Mike or myself on LinkedIn and follow our work on AI and sustainability.
Excellent.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.